There are incredible upsides and joy, which is a word you don't often associate with power, but that there can be real joy and satisfaction and feelings of achievement in having power, in being able to have impact and change communities and change organizations and change countries and change companies and change the life for your team, and that is the result of power, and that power is a great thing to have.
Hi, I'm Jason Harris, and you're listening to Soul and Science. Fast forward your marketing mind in about 20 minutes. Welcome to the podcast. Today, for our 50th episode, we're taking a bit of a left turn. We're going to do something a little different. I'm joined today by the US Special Correspondent for BBC Studios Katty Kay, and we're going to discuss power and the joy and fulfillment we can all find when we make an impact. Katty is an award-winning journalist and the co-author of several New York Times best-selling books, including The Confidence Code and most recently, The Power Code. In today's episode, you'll learn about the power of women's instincts. Katty argues that women's inherent qualities such as empathy, collaboration, and emotional intelligence are assets that can revolutionize the way we approach leadership. The pandemic changed the way we think about work and flexibility, challenging the traditional definition of power. And today we're going to rethink power and discuss these topics. You'll also get a bonus, a reminder to stay optimistic. A more equitable distribution of power is possible, and by fostering a mindset of optimism and possibility, we can create a future where power is a force for good. All right, let's dive in and fast forward our power minds in under 30 minutes. Your mother was a journalist. Your father was a diplomat. So we're sort of in that zeitgeist right there. Did you pick up from your family that you also wanted to get into, learning about foreign policy and journalism? And is that how you got into it? Or did you take a left turn and then come back to it?
I left university having studied medieval French and Italian literature, which is lovely but kind of useless.
Unless you teach it.
Yeah, unless you teach it, which I was not good enough to do. So I went and worked for the Bank of England. And I thought that what I wanted to do, having grown up moving literally every 3 years, there was one point in my life in my teenage years where I went to 6 schools in the course of 5 years in 3 different countries. And I knew I wanted to kind of live abroad. I knew I wanted to work in that policy space. But I thought what I wanted to do was work in international development, working kind of, for an NGO, for a nonprofit, the Save the Children type thing. And so I thought, well, a way to do that would be to study development economics, which sounded a lot more useful than studying Dante. And so I went to the Bank of England, and I think kind of they hated me as much as I hated them. And after a year, I left and I went and worked for an aid agency in Zimbabwe. And having sworn that I was never going to be a journalist because so many of my friends at university were becoming journalists, I was out there working for an aid agency, and a friend of mine who did work for the BBC came out and he said, "This is crazy. There's so many great stories here. You should be telling them." And next time he came to visit for a holiday, he brought a little tape recorder and he said, "This is the record button and this is how you do it." And that's how I started. Oh
my God, it's amazing. So you didn't actually have a gig, but you started doing stories?
Yeah. So I started just like freelancing, and I called up the BBC Africa service and I had one name and I said, "Look, I'm going out. Would you like to have a story? There's this cool story." It was actually on conservation. And would you be interested? And they said, "Oh, yeah, why not?" I mean, there was no skin off their nose. They didn't have to pay me if they didn't like it. And so I started like that and I was just freelance. And then I went back to London after a couple of years and got a job in London before going out to Tokyo.
What do you think that you are particularly amazing at? What makes you very unique in the field, do you think?
I think I'm curious. I mean, I'm borderline nosy. So I kind of, I find people and what makes them tick really interesting. Wherever I am, whether it's, talking to farmers in Zimbabwe or mothers in Tokyo or politicians in Washington or voters around Arizona. I mean, I'm very curious. And I think that helps a lot as a journalist. I'm also very efficient. I write fast. I don't agonize it. And if you're a news journalist, the kind of real key, which I was in, now I'm much less in news journalism, but breaking news journalists, you have to be able to be fast and calm and meet deadlines. You've got to hit the top of the hour. If it's 5 minutes to the top of the hour and a big story breaks, you have to file by the top of the hour. And that never really fazed me. I quite enjoy that.
Combination of curiosity and efficiency.
Yeah, efficiency sounds really boring, doesn't it? But actually, I think it's an underrated skill.
Do you find, because you're a curious person and you like to get to the heart of the story or the person, do you find that you're pretty empathetic?
Well, I mean, they have this, the BBC, we're not allowed to have opinions. It's in the BBC's public sector charter. There's this kind of old joke that when you join the BBC, they take you into the basement, into a room where they extract your opinion organs. That never actually happened to me, but we don't take sides in wars or elections, and I think there is a real value, particularly in today's media environment.
It's very powerful today. Yeah.
To have facts. I mean, God, that we grew up in a world where, which sounds sort of wonderful and quaint, right? Where you listened to a news broadcast and you got the facts, and then you went away and formed your opinions. And now people have their opinions and they find the news or views station that just reinforces their opinions. And I do think there is look, sometimes it's hard. Of course, I'm human and I definitely analyze things, but I think I have, maybe I got it from my dad, who's a diplomat. I have an ability to see both sides and report both sides. In fact, I think I have an almost inability not to do that. I think I would find it very hard to be an opinion journalist.
But you have opinions personally.
Sure. Look, impartial is not the same as unempathetic, right? I mean, right. Yeah, I've reported from places where, earthquake zones, and you have huge empathy. I was up in Newtown just after Sandy Hook, or you go to yet another mass shooting in the United States, and God, I've cried on camera. Your heart goes out to people. Of course, I'm human, and I have kids of my own, and I think Sandy Hook was the worst story I've ever covered. I mean, it was just awful. And this town at first wanted reporters there, and then after a few days, they really did not want us there. And I left, actually. I didn't want to stay there after 4 days. It was clear the town needed us to go.
Yeah.
I spoke to, I'm not a war journalist, but I spoke to hardened war journalists who told me that Sandy Hook was the worst story they'd ever covered.
I believe it. In your work as a journalist and as an author, do you think about personal branding?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you.
I am conscious of what we were talking about impartiality, right? It is something I've thought, if I ever were to get into a space of just being a commentator, the years of being and kind of guarding a reputation as a level-headed kind of observer of American politics with something of an outside perspective that is impartial, that would go out the window very fast. I mean, I could lose that in one show. It's hard to keep it. And there is, obviously there have been times when it's kind of, you get frustrated with politicians and you get tempted to do that. But it would change my brand overnight. And I've kind of assiduously cultivated that brand, consciously cultivated that brand, because I think it offers something that other people aren't offering, and that is useful in the kind of political sphere. And so I am conscious of that. I do, I even my books, which are not political books, are reported. I have data and research, and analysis from professionals that back up everything I kind of say or write. And I think that's the space that I offer the most in, and it's a space I don't want to give up. So I think you're right. I mean, I hadn't really, Jason, thought of it. And the reason I like the question is because I hadn't really thought of it in the terms you've put it, but I think it is something that I am very conscious of, in fact.
All right, well, I want to turn to talking about your new book, but I have one last question, which is, as a journalist, what is the best part of your job and the worst part of your job?
I kind of, when I'm in the studio and I'm anchoring or, hosting a show, I sort of love it when things go wrong. when I'm really tested. And, you have to, and you're like, it's like, spinning plates, right? So you got three people talking in your ear. You've got to hit deadlines, a major thing. You're hosting a major event. It's just you're so focused, and it's when I'm really tested. And I kind of, my adrenaline kicks in, and I sort of love that. Which is, I get, the most satisfying, I think, is when interviews go really well and you do a really good interview, or like I do a really long form, an hour-long documentary traveling around the country. I love that. New ways of broadcasting, new ways of talking to people, new styles of me, imparting information or ideas. I really enjoy that too. So like I recently did a documentary on European monarchies. It's not my subject. It was completely new to me. It was much more informal, a different way of approaching the camera, a different way of reaching the audience, different types of stories. I got after the amount of time I spent covering American politics, particularly the complete chaos of the Trump administration, which was exhausting, and every journalist would tell you that. Covering European monarchies and wandering around palaces was just heaven. It was like, it's candy. So I think that's probably I like that. I like it when I'm tested, and whether it's because things are going wrong and it's all kind of crazy in the studio, or because I'm out in the field and it's a different way of talking to people. The worst part is getting up at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
And all the hair and makeup. That's a freaking nightmare the older you get. Growing old as a woman on television is not great, I have to say, for my ego. There's sometimes when the worst part is waiting around for a new, when not much is happening. Actually, that's the worst part, is when not much is happening, when there isn't much news. Unfortunately, in Washington, that's never the case. But there are periods where it's lulls and you're like, oh, this is just not very interesting.
Do you feel like you always have to be on?
No, I'm very good at switching off. And maybe that's something that I've learned. I'm 58. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm pretty good at what I do. And I also really, unlike most Americans who woefully leave vacation time on the table, I never leave vacation time on the table. And I think I have no illusions about the fact that I am replaceable and dispensable. And so if I go away and things go swimmingly, that's great. If I go away and they don't go so well, I'm still going to go away. Yeah,
I love that. How much vacation do you take a year?
I take at least 6 weeks, probably 8.
I love that.
Mm-hmm. And I always have done ever since I've moved to the States. In fact, one of the reasons, and actually whenever I've spoken to American news organizations about joining them, I've said, look, this is great, but you have to know I take 6 weeks vacation a year.
Yeah.
And you can pay me or not pay me for all of it, but I'm going to take it. And that's an advantage of being older, right? And more experienced and more senior. But I do think there is a reason that I just don't think there's any downside to taking proper vacation. I mean, we need it. Our brains need to recharge.
Makes you better at your job.
Makes you better at your
100%.
job. We know study after study after study tells us that 70-hour weeks, 50-week long years is not good for anybody. So why don't we just look at the data and accept that?
All right. So you have a new book out, The Power Code. You have a co-author, Claire Shipman.
This is our 5th book together.
Your 5th book.
Yeah. And we still talk. We're still friends.
That's amazing. I wrote one book. I can't imagine thinking about writing it with someone else. I could barely do it on my own. How does that work? Do you say we do an outline and then say, you're going to report on this chapter, I'm going to take this chapter, or do you sit down and collaborate together?
Yeah, so it has evolved over the 5 books, and we've now been writing together since 2008. So 15 years we've been working together, and we've kind of got into a rhythm. But generally speaking, we come up with an idea for a book, do the proposal together, sell the proposal. We always sell it before we write it. And then we come up with research areas, and we'll do most of the research separately, but the big interviews, what we can tell are what are going to be the sort of cornerstone interviews for the book, we will do those together. And whether we travel for them or whether we do them on Zoom or whether we do them over the phone in the old days. And then we will come up with the chapter outlines, and I'll write one chapter, Claire will write another chapter, and then we send them backwards and forwards. And we'll have sort of areas that we particularly are interested in and we'll delve into those. Like Claire is very interested in neuroscience, and so she does a lot of the science interviews. And got into this book. We talk a lot about relationships, and I was very interested in that, and so I did a lot of the interviews around that. But I don't think you can tell reading the book that it's written by two people. Our voice is pretty seamless by now. Our writing style, we've done it enough together that it's not a problem writing together. I think the first book we wrote, we had to do a lot more merging the two different writing styles. That's not the case anymore.
So on her chapters, you'll play more of the editor, and on your chapters, she'll play more of the editor?
Yeah, I would say so. And honestly, I remember when we wrote our first book together, somebody, actually was a guy, said, "You're crazy, you'll never speak to each other again. This will ruin your friendship." And actually, we've become closer over the years. And we've never really had an issue where if I've written something and she wants to change it, unless I think that the changing it changes the meaning in a way which is not accurate. Otherwise, I'm fine. I don't feel precious about my words, and she doesn't feel precious about her words. So we know that each other makes the book better. I mean, I know that my book, sometimes it might drive me a bit crazy, like I'll have written something and she'll take something out, or vice versa. But I know that the end product is better because the two of us are working on this.
And when you come up with this idea, the power code, more joy, less ego, maximum impact for women, parentheses, and everyone. Do you say, hey, I have this idea, or does Claire say, I have this idea, or do you brainstorm? You've got sort of a bunch of books around this code idea. Do you find the white space together, or do you kind of bat ideas back and forth until you find one that you like? How does that process work?
Yeah, we bat ideas back and forth, and it takes us a while to find the subject. So the confidence subject, we wrote the confidence code in 2014, and that book is still selling really well. And it came to us out of our first book when we wrote a book on different work-life balance type structures. And we were interviewing all these senior women, and we'd often say to them, how did you get to where you are?
Is that Womenomics?
Womenomics was our very first book.
And then the confidence code, the science and art of self-assurance was your second book.
That was our second book.
Yep. And that's when you started with this idea of the code.
That's where the code idea came from. And the idea of remaking things, right? Accessing things, taking a whole load of data and science and remaking it and making it accessible to people. And we would interview these senior women, and we'd say, how did you get to where you are? And they would say, well, I was just lucky, or I was in the right place at the right time. And we realized we never heard men say that. And that got to the idea of confidence. And we wrote confidence, and then we wrote about confidence for girls. And we had a couple of spin-offs on that theme because girls seemed so important around confidence. And then power took us a while. It was a while since we were looking for a new subject. We were looking for a subject where what we both like is getting into the science, getting into the social science, doing the research. We wanted a subject that was meaty and big, and where we could kind of tease it apart and come up with something new. And power fit the bill because both of us were frustrated by all of the data showing that the numbers at the top just haven't moved enough, right? So women are only 10% of CEOs. We're less than 10% of world leaders, but we know women are better educated. We have more degrees. We have more postgraduate degrees. We have more PhDs than men. So we're certainly what's going on there? What's going on at the very top? And I think that's when we started to think, well, maybe there was something around this idea of power, our understanding of power, and what could we dig. It was kind of meaty enough for us.
In some of the prior books, you're telling women what they should know. You're almost giving like some research and secrets. And in this book, you're really saying that the structure, the dynamic itself needs to change. It's not necessarily you need to act this way or be more confident, or this is how you can get ahead. It's more that we have a problem that we have to dismantle power in general, like writ large. Is that safe to say?
I think that's true. Yeah. I think that's a smart analysis of it. This is more of a kind of manifesto. And in a way, I guess the other books have led up to this. It is a kind of reaffirmation of everything women are doing. what we're saying in this book is, as you said in the introduction, women's instincts are right. We are leading well. So I think, there are certainly incredible skills that women bring, but it's more on this idea of power. It's that women see power differently. They use it differently. They want it for different reasons. And what we're arguing is that those reasons are are more impactful. The world, we would all be better off if those reasons were valued and promoted and listened to, and that it's plausible. This is not a Pollyanna-ish book. It's not a sort of, this is so far a utopian ideal that we can't get to. This is very doable. This is very practical and doable. And if we could do the things we're advocating, I think we'd be in a better position, both politically and in business worlds.
What did you discover about why most women don't want power?
Yeah, there's often with our work a kind of piece of research that triggers something. That piece of research sort of triggered this book. And it's this piece of research that came out of Harvard a few years ago from a young professor called Alison Wood Brooks, who did a study of, thousands of people. And time again, she came up with the same conclusion, which is that women don't want power. And she did it by asking women and men, what are your life goals and what are your power-related goals? So life goals are caring for family, caring for kids, being part of the community, running, exercising, developing friendships, those kind of things. What are your power-related goals are the corner office, a bigger team, a bigger salary, a better title, more control at work, a higher position at work. And she found that throughout all of the thousands of people she interviewed, men have more power goals compared to women and fewer life goals. Women have more life goals. And the reason she concludes that women don't want power is because getting power in the current structure involves giving up too many of those life goals. I mean, just the time factor alone, we have to give up too much. So the cost of getting power is too high. And power itself just is not appealing. Doesn't allow for those kind of more community-based life goals. And so I think that really intrigued us. The idea that power itself, women just don't want it. And it's specifically power as it's currently constructed.
It seems as if because of the pandemic, it's sped up a lot of the changing ideas of work and flexibility and what it means to have a well-rounded life versus power by the amount of hours you put in or who reports to you. I guess it seems more doable now than if your book had come out 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great woman we feature. One of the female leaders we feature is a woman called Cint Marshall, who is the first Black female CEO of an NBA team, the Dallas Mavericks.
Yes.
She was tapped by Mark Cuban to go and run the Dallas Mavericks. And Cint has this great philosophy of leadership, which is you bring your whole self to work. And she thinks organizations are stronger, particularly in a time of crisis, if they really know the people who work for them, not just in a work context, but in your personal life context as well. And she makes a point of making sure that she's on top of that and that her leadership team is on top of that in terms of, how they talk to their employees, etc. And she has this image, which I think is great, is that you don't leave home and then go into a phone booth and put on a Superman cape and turn up in the office. The person who turns up in the office is the same person that leaves home in the morning with all of the shit that's going on in their life. It's the same person. So you need to know who that person is. And she thinks that's an asset. Knowing that is an asset, not a problem, which is, I guess, historically, there's been kind of church and state on this. And I think what COVID did is it broke down walls. We know, I can't hide the crap that's going on in my household because my dog might start barking or my kids might wander into the room or there's a pile of laundry in the background. And I think we got to know our associates and our co-workers' lives. I'm looking at your, blue thing and I can see your fun pictures on the walls. I get to know a bit more about you because I can literally see into your life for good and for bad, warts and all, in a way that I, was not true beforehand. There was more of a separation between home life and work life. And so some things have changed, but I mean, the reason we dig into kind of the role of men in all of this and the role of marriages, which we never expected to. I mean, we do science and politics and business, but we've never really done marriages, is because it's very clear to us that not everything has changed, right? Not enough has changed in our home lives that will support women ever getting power outside their homes in the way that we think they need to, and that the world would be better off if they did. But actually, we came away with it with a far more empathetic view of the box that men are in. I mean, you're sort of stuck. I can, as a woman, I can work full-time. I can work part-time. I can work not at all and raise children for all of my life. And all of that is socially acceptable. Society is just fine with all of that. However educated I am, that's not a problem. Men, the number of stay-at-home dads has actually not shifted very much. Men are still expected to be the breadwinner, if not the primary breadwinner. And it's pretty hard for men to get out of that box. You're in a much narrower lane. You have a much fewer options than women do in some ways. And I think that's as tough for men as it is for women.
Yeah. You're marketing the book as maximum impact for women, but everyone, because you're talking about societal changes, not just for, one gender or the other. Well, I was going to ask, because I want to ask you some personal questions, but on the book, I was going to ask you that the book will be successful when, and it sounds like the answer is when women have an equal share of power in the world.
I think another success, it would be more successful if women could look at power and think, actually, I want it. There are things I can do with this, that power, so that the path to getting it is made easier, that the power itself has changed enough, and that women realize that there are incredible upsides and joy, which is a word you don't often associate with power, but that there can be real joy and satisfaction and feelings of achievement in having power, in being able to have impact and change communities and change organizations and change countries and change companies and change the life for your team, and that is the result of power, and that power is a great thing to have.
Is there a place or a process where maybe you're trying to write a curious and efficient story quickly, or you're on chapter 10 and you feel stuck? Is there a process or a place that you go to get unstuck?
So I find with writing, the best thing is to keep doing it, to make myself just sit down at the computer and put words down. And if they're the wrong words, it doesn't matter. You can delete them. I love the delete button. But I find that for me, I'm quite practical about writing and about most things I do. So just doing it is the best way. And I don't have a particular place. I mean, sometimes it's, in my living room, sometimes it's in my study, sometimes I'll, head out to a cabin somewhere, but it doesn't really matter for me. Oh, trains and planes. I'm pretty good on trains and planes. There's nothing like the quiet car on the Acceler, actually, for being productive.
If you had one word, how would you describe your style?
Optimistic.
Ooh, I love that. Where do you want people to pick up the Power Code, which I highly recommend? The Power Code, More Joy, Less Ego, Maximum Impact for Women and Everyone. Where should people buy it?
Go to kayandshipman.com or wherever you like buying your books, but that's our website, Kay and Shipman. It's our last names.
All right. Well, thanks for being on the Soul and Science podcast. It was great to hear about you and learn more about the book. And please, everyone, go buy this book and really listen to, we're maybe closer than we thought about changing the power dynamics here.
Yeah, thanks to you, Jason. That was really fun. And next time, though, I want to ask you all of those same questions.
Okay. That's the curious part.
I know, that's the curious part, yeah.
Soul and Science is a Mechanism podcast produced by Maggie Bowles, Ryan Tillotson, Tyler Nielsen, Emma Swanson, and Lily Jablonski. The show is edited by Daniel Ferreira with theme music by Kyle Merritt. And I'm your host, Jason Harris.